Hello and welcome. I'm Louise Watt and this is Correspondents, where we talk about the news and what's going on behind the news with reporters around the region. Today on the programme, 2024 in review. From democracy to conflict, we take a look back at some of the key events of the past year. Elections in the US and here in Taiwan made headlines around the world. We unpick what the results could mean for 2025 and beyond. And will 2025 be the year conflict erupts in Asia? We take a closer look at brewing tensions in the South China Sea and discuss what North Korea's involvement could mean for the war in Ukraine. To discuss all of this, I'm joined by Angie Teo from Reuters. She's in charge of the news agency's North Asia video coverage. And Josh Wilkes, a reporter at Domino, a Taiwan-based site covering geopolitics in the region. Thank you both for joining me on Correspondents.
Thanks for having us today, Louise.
2024 was billed as the year of democracy because we saw half the world's population head to the polls. We had a presidential election here in Taiwan. Tsai Ing-wen, Taiwan's first female president, she had reached her term limit, so she couldn't stand again. But her vice president, Lai Ching-te, beat out two opposition candidates to win a four-year term. Now, he is even more despised by Beijing than Tsai was. Angie, relations were already bad between Taiwan and China. Did they get worse in 2024?
Well, I wouldn't say that we actually get worse per se, but let's say that Lai Ching-te's reaction is very new for both Taiwan and China. You mentioned that Beijing despised Lai. Beijing obviously is not a big fan of Lai. They call him a separatist. We have seen at least 3 military drills from January, May, and until October, where even they do like a lightning kind of one-day drill around Taiwan. So if you ask me whether it's getting worse, I would not want to predict that, but I would say it could be a new norm, given that now we're seeing more and more military drills. We do have senior Taiwanese official that told Reuters earlier that China is actually trying to use all this drill to build capacity, so they could one day turn this into military drills into a full attack. Is this gonna be something that we have to watch? I'm sure, yes. But is this something we have to be nervous? Maybe not yet, as one political analyst did tell us that all this exercise is just a political exercise, as what they see at the moment.
Yes, because actually the first major one of the year came in May, just after Lai's inauguration. In his speech, Lai called on China to stop its political and military intimidation of Taiwan. Josh, do you see the military intimidation has changed in any way this year?
But actually, if you look at the drills this year and you compare them to drills last year, and then if you compare those to drills in 2022, the Pelosi drills, even though the sort of propaganda packages around the drills have been getting larger, maybe more flamboyant, the actual content of the drills mostly has been getting smaller. So the drills have been shorter, they've involved more planes, more ships, but for shorter periods, so the total sort of number of person hours the PLA is using is reduced. And also they haven't involved live firing this year, which is different from previous years. People remember in 2022, China actually fired missiles over Taiwan and fired munitions in the waters around Taiwan. That hasn't happened this year. What's important, what is sort of more serious for Taiwan, is the increased involvement of the Coast Guard, the Chinese Coast Guard.
Josh, what do you think we can expect from China in terms of military drills next year?
So what I actually think happened this year is that China made a mistake. When they called the drills Joint Sword 2024A, they created an expectation that there would be B drills, there would be a second set of drills. And in doing so, they basically had to hold some, and they just chose to hold them after the National Day speech, which, as you've previously covered, wasn't particularly contentious. And I think that next year there obviously will be drills, because if there are not, people will say that Beijing has backed down or has relaxed, and I don't think they want that. I think next year we will see drills which are called Joint Sword 2025 without an A. So they give themselves a choice of whether to hold drills later in the year or not.
So Angie, this year also saw Taiwan increase the time of conscription from 4 months to 1 year, and that's because of the China threat. From what you hear and what you've heard over the year, is there a growing fear amongst the Taiwanese public that conflict may break out?
So I guess for people who live outside of Taiwan, whenever there's a drill from China around the island, they always think that people in Taiwan will be always in a panic, and they would think like, oh my God, things will be supply running out. But the fact is, when you're on the ground, life is normal, right? For most of the people, actually, most of the time when the drill kick off, we go and interview them, and they were like, oh, another? They didn't even know that it has started. I don't think that it has sparked any sense of fears. Even though China, as what Josh said, that it may increase its intensity or it will continue in the year to come, I don't think that make Taiwanese fear and say, I need to prepare for an attack that could happen this year or next year. But what we do see, and I like to talk more about the propaganda part, is that we as a journalist this year, we have been invited to more military drills from the Taiwanese side, because from the Taiwanese side, they do actually realize that having these messages out, just like how China, every time when they struck a drill, the first thing they do is to send out a propaganda video to just send out the fear and let people know, and also get bolster support within the country. So I think Taiwan absolutely need that, and the government seems to be also recognize that. This is why we may actually see a short period of more propaganda war going forward, but not so much about fear within the society among the people.
If you don't live here, you won't be aware that the Taiwanese Strait is actually quite wide, and these exercises take place far out to sea. There's zero impact on people's day-to-day life, except that they will see more Taiwanese military activity in Taipei or around airfields or so on.
As we just discussed, military reaction from China. An election this year that got more attention than Taiwan's, if you can believe it, was the US election. After 4 years out of power, Donald Trump won the presidency. He'll be inaugurated in January. Angie, Donald Trump has an America First foreign policy. What could that mean for the region here?
Well, I think whenever you talk about Donald Trump or US, the first thing when we look at Asia is definitely China. We can see basically where during the campaign, Donald Trump already said he's going to impose 60% of tariffs imports from China. We also see that he has, based on the appointment of the Foreign Secretary, Marco Rubio, who is also quite pro-Taiwan, you could expect quite some difficult time for China, perhaps when Trump is in office. But also don't forget that Trump did praise Xi Jinping for ruling the country with iron fist when he was first time in office. So how,
and he says he got on very well with Xi.
Exactly. So how this dynamic will play out, I think it's kind of like a balance, pull and push kind of thing. In November, when we have a G20 and APEC summit, Biden was there, and Xi Jinping was also there. China was trying to present itself as like a more stable power to all its other allies in Europe and with other African countries and either the middle countries. So I think China potentially see this as an opportunity to use the unpredictable Trump in office to become a time to show people, hey, China is actually a more stable partner. So I think that would be quite interesting dynamic to observe. Obviously, the Taiwan issue is also big, but also don't forget that during the campaign, Trump also accused Taiwan for stealing US chip business and also asked Taiwan to pay the protection money. So the biggest question here is how much US would support its traditional allies. I think it's always a question mark. And that is the same, I guess, for Japan and South Korea.
Absolutely. Josh, what do you see in the tea leaves for Trump's presidency on Taiwan specifically? Do you think his administration is going to give more strong signs of support for Taiwan like his first presidency did? You know, he sent high-level officials to visit, he increased arms sales, or is he going to see Taiwan as less important this time around?
It's a great question. It's the question we're all asking. I think really Trump is going to be tough on China, but this is going to probably be a relatively tough 4 years for everybody in the region, right? Like, he's also going to be tough on Japan, on South Korea. South Korea had a really rough time in the first Trump years when he was asking them to pay a lot more for hosting US troops in South Korea and so on. And so there's going to be a lot of unpredictability, like you said. For Taiwan specifically, they really need to understand very fast what the people around Trump really want. A lot of people advising Trump have said in the run-up to the election that they want to withdraw support for Ukraine and increase support for Taiwan. Taiwanese officials need to understand if that's really true, or if they are more inclined to be more generally isolationist and will later sort of pull back from Taiwan as well. And we've seen the appointments Trump is making, I guess you'd say surprisingly positive for Taiwan. Rubio is a big win. Wilkes feels quite good for Taiwan. We've just had, a few weeks ago, Alex Wong, who was one of the officials who visited Taiwan in Trump's first term and spoke with Tsai.
So just to add on that, personally, I haven't really spoken to people after all this appointment, but the moment when Trump was elected, in Taiwan, when we speak to normal people, they were in doubt. In Taiwan now, we have a two very bipolar situation that some people are questioning the democracy in US, but there are some people who are actually very welcoming still with Trump, especially the business community. They will wonder what kind of changes that they can get from Trump. So this is what we have heard from the ground. So I think with Trump in office for Taiwan, could be a good news, but it might be a bad news either. We will see. But one thing for sure, we do think that defense front, I think Taiwan will want to prove itself that, hey, we're not here for a free ride. So this is why we also heard that there might be some new deals that may come out very soon after he takes office. But we'll see how they go.
It seems like Taipei wants to put in a big order early, like, a really big chunky defense buy, billions and billions of US dollars to give Trump that kind of early win that he or people around him can point to him and say, Taiwan is here.
Nothing confirmed, but we'll watch.
Yeah, exactly,
this,
right.
sure.
We have to wait and see.
All right, let's take a quick break. You're watching Correspondents on TaiwanPlus, and when we come back, more predictions for the year ahead, and we ask our guests which stories resonated for them the most this year. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Correspondents. I'm Louise Watt. One key theme of 2024, sadly, was conflict. The war between Israel and Hamas escalated. Russia's war in Ukraine has dragged on with no end in sight. And in November, it was confirmed that soldiers from North Korea are fighting alongside Russian forces. Angie, 2024 has been characterized by a growing closeness between Pyongyang and Moscow and growing animosity between North and South Korea. What stood out for you?
It's a very interesting dynamic, I would say. Over the years in South Korea, our team were very, very busy. Since May, when the balloons started to float from the north to the south, we were chasing balloons every day.
Because they weren't just ordinary balloons, were they? They were carrying trash.
Exactly.
Trash from North Korea
fertilizer.
and even landing on the presidential office.
Exactly.
In
we
Seoul.
actually captured that when they landed in the presidential palace, and then we were seeing like all these balloons floating out from North Korea. So, this distance that between the two countries that are right next to each other has become much and much polarized. And remember, just in early November, North Korea also tested a record ICBM that flew over 1,000 kilometers, Hwasong 19. That was just day before the US election. Again, it's a mysterious country. No one knows why they're doing that. Is that a message right ahead of US election? That's always an open question. In contrast, we see a warmer ties between North Korea and Russia, as you mentioned.
And how significant is that partnership?
It's really interesting dynamic. If we talk about Putin and Kim Jong-un, this is the first time we have seen that Russia and North Korea came out hand in hand, worked together, sending team troops into Ukraine in an obvious escalation, trying to show the world that, hey, we're here, we're the brotherhood with each other. But one big element here they left behind is China, who is watching friendship flourish closely and a little bit uncertain where this is going to happen. So if you ask me how significant it is, I personally do think this is something that we have to watch closely because of the uncertainty, the dynamic between these two countries. I would not be surprised that if North Korea and Russia would come out together with another comprehensive strategic partnership.
Yeah, and in terms of potential conflict in Asia in 2025, Josh, is Kim Jong-un going to be more belligerent and emboldened by support from Russia?
Maybe. I think we don't know. I think we should try and think at least partly the way that North Korea is approaching its partnership with Russia in terms of its partnership with China, in terms of whether it's hedging against Beijing or simply looking for leverage. Because I think quite obviously one of the things that Beijing fears most in the world is an intensely destabilized North Korea. And so anything that North Korea does that seems to perhaps frighten or concern Beijing or draw closer to Russia is going to be a concern for Beijing. With North Korea in Ukraine, there's a clarification or a nuance we should observe, which is that North Korean troops aren't fighting in Ukraine, they're fighting in Russia. They're fighting in Kursk, which is the region of Russia that Ukraine, or the territory in Russia that Ukraine seized during the summer. So as far as we know, North Korean troops haven't entered Ukraine. And again, it's very difficult to know what that means, but it does feel as if North Korea or Russia or whoever has made that decision is observing some kind of pale red line that they have decided for the moment not to take a further step in terms of North Korean involvement in the conflict.
And something for us next year with Trump back in the office. I personally cover when Trump met Kim Jong-un twice in Singapore and Hanoi. So his businessman-like mindset couldn't come back in play. Trump was also the person who said that he will put Ukraine war to stop in one day. So how is he going to first stop that war and also tame that Kim brother in North Korea? I think this is something that would be very interesting to see when he finally take office.
Well, another area of growing conflict this year was the South China Sea. Now, various nations claim parts of the South China Sea. China claims virtually all of it. And in 2024, China and the Philippines have had regular confrontations at sea, including boat rammings, physical fights too, between Chinese Coast Guard personnel and Filipino sailors. Angie, why did it all kick off in 2024 and is it set to get worse?
Well, the thing is, it has been there. This issue has been there for the last decades or more. And we have seen that China has built the airstrip on the islands, all the islands that they had claimed. I think it's also because of changing government in Philippines that has taken a stronger stance against China in that sense. So that's why we have seen a lot of clashes, collision incidents that happen across over there. And Philippines will accuse Chinese Coast Guard for being reckless, illegal, and being aggressive and dangerous. So in July, we have seen Philippines and Japan actually sign a military pact to cooperate with each other. If any aggression in China, they could actually deploy military, which is a big deal. And then in November, we also see the Philippine president actually try to claim that property on the maritime and designated airline and air route, which is unprecedented. In this year, especially in Taiwan, we're hearing it a lot of it is because I feel like in Taiwan, especially among the media, there's kind of like a feeling that this could be a precursor of what could have happened to the island if China one day decided to attack.
As if China is using this as a test case to see how
potentially
the US, whether it comes to the Philippines, defends, because it's a treaty ally, of course, and Taiwan isn't.
I think specifically in the South China Sea, the US created quite a lot of trouble for itself this year. It's a treaty ally of the Philippines, and it has consistently said after every single incident between China and the Philippines that we are an ally and we will protect the Philippines. But it's never really addressed the problem of, well, does this incident count and should the US have responded? And in doing so, it's created a sort of second strategic ambiguity where it's no longer really clear to anybody exactly what the US thinks would be the kind of incident where it would have to intervene and protect Filipino troops or Filipino territory. And this is concerning for Taiwan, because we also have to deal with strategic ambiguity here in the same way.
Correct. And don't forget, just in this year, just off Kinmen, we have seen an increment cases of the Coast Guard coming very close to Taiwanese water. Even in one incident that we have, the Chinese Coast Guard bought one of the ferry for inspection, right? So all this is very closely watched, obviously, from the island. And this Coast Guard could be a gray zone tactics that would just escalate the situation very quickly.
This kind of boarding is exactly what we would expect to see around Taiwan if Beijing was practicing blockades around here. So it's the kind of signal that we can see things are worse around Kinmen. And we could also look for that in the coming years, next year or afterwards.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about what other news stories stood out for you both this year. Angie?
Other than politics and defense, unfortunately, part of my job also covered a lot of disaster. We did start a year with a bang when Japan with an earthquake that killed over 120 people, followed by the second day when a plane crashed at Haneda Airport. So it wasn't kind of like an omen of the year that it's not going to be a great year ahead. Following throughout the year, Japan, we have seen economically that yen was tanking. It went down to 38-year low. And then at the end of the year, we see also a little bit turbulence on their political side, where Ishiba was elected as a minority government. So ups and downs, a lot. I could only say that it's been a very busy and crazy year. Even just in Taiwan, we also had one of the biggest earthquakes that we have not experienced for decades on April 3rd. And then followed by typhoons that seems to be not ending.
And Angie, apart from conflict and geopolitics, what do you think could be a big issue in 2025?
So 2025, I think climate change will continue to be one of the biggest issues. As I mentioned, that disaster, a lot of it will actually caused by climate change. We have seen increasing floodings in China. We have seen landslides in Japan, torrential rain more than usual, hot days, longer summer, etc. And now we're approaching winter. So all of this will continue to be a focus, and it could intensify for the years to come. So I think it's also time for us as a mankind to reflect what we really want to do with our world. In November, we saw Mount Fuji had a low snow cap, the latest in 130 years that they recorded. So I think if you not talk about politics and defense, if you look at just climate itself, it's actually quite grim and would keep us busy enough for the years to come.
Josh, any other predictions from you for the coming year?
Actually, I think you're right that climate change is a much bigger issue and faces us all, but climate changing or the weather changing is also going to have direct security implications, kind of rolling back again. Historically, October has been seen as a calm month in the Taiwan Strait, the sort of month that you could sail a lot of ships across it if you wanted to. This October was not that. We had 3-4 typhoons. It was an intense period of weather activity. So changing climate is going to change a lot of assumptions for people in the region as well.
Yeah.
Assumptions as to when China could launch an attack.
Assumptions as to when China could launch an attack specifically, yes. But we also might think in much more general terms. The whole South Pacific region, we have many countries that in 50 years' time may simply not exist because the sea level rise has inundated them. The humanitarian implications for that are one thing and are disastrous. The security implications for that are another one altogether.
Angie Teo from Reuters and Josh Wilkes from Domino Theory, thank you both for joining me on Correspondents.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. I think if we could sum up the coming year in a word, it would be uncertain. And we'll be following events next year here on Correspondents, trying to make sense of them, of course. We hope you will join us then. Remember that if you're watching us on YouTube, do subscribe to the Correspondents playlist to get the latest episodes or catch up on some of the ones you may have missed. I'm Louise Watt. See you next time.